reading books or watching movies or listening to music from or about those with different cultures, life experiences, even different religions, can help us to really expand and grow our imagination rather than constrict it.
It's so good to see you again and to have you here at Regent this summer.
It's really good to see you too, and I always love to come to Regent.
As you know, I'm Hope, and I'm a student here. I'm in the Master of Arts in Theological Studies program, quite the name. And yeah, we're just really glad to have you here and to learn a bit more about you. So I thought we could just get started if you could tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, I'm currently Associate Professor of Humanities at Lee University in Tennessee. And my main area of focus, I'm very interested in the relationship between theology and the arts, particularly contemporary literature, and also I like to talk and research a lot about popular culture and how just in everyday life the art that we engage with has so much to tell us about God and the human condition and all those important questions.
Yes, I love that too. And that actually, I feel like connects to what you're teaching this week at Regent.
Yes.
Am I right? It's arts, empathy, and spiritual formation?
Yes.
Wow. I would love to hear more about that. Specifically, like, what are those three things to you? And how do they intersect? Why do they intersect?
Well, the arts, with the arts in the course, for instance, we're talking about, we've looked at paintings, we're looking at television series, films, music, literature, so across the board. Yeah. And I'm very interested in the relationship between those things because I've seen in the classroom and also in some different ministry things that I've done that conversations around the arts really can take us all to a space of vulnerability where we begin to open up with one another, be more attentive. As we become more attentive to the characters in the stories, we become more attentive to one another, and also oftentimes more attentive to God's image in one another, and thus more attentive to God himself. So I think that leads to both empathy, that's through this sort of spiritual formation, this really cultivate a greater sense of empathy.
I see.
The arts give us that opportunity to really enter into someone else's story and to be hospitable and to be welcoming and create a space for them. Yeah. And so I'm very much interested. I've seen it very much in my classroom as students. Back in at Lee University, as students read all kinds of literature, especially literature about people that have different life experiences than they do.
Yeah.
So
I love that word attention that you're using, and it's teaching us to be attentive and attentive to experiences and attentive to emotions, and how it's actually building our spirituality, kind of like humanizing us as it's really relational. I feel like that's what's cool about it.
Yeah, I've started thinking about that quite a bit because of the philosopher Simone Weil, who's written a great essay on the story of the Good Samaritan and about how attentiveness to the other, attentiveness to your neighbor, she says that it's actually a creative act, that in resigning part of yourself, you're actually creating. You're actually maybe you see somebody who's been dehumanized, but the way that you become attentive to them can help to rehumanize them. And so it's interesting that the parable of the Good Samaritan is itself a story, teaching us how to be attentive. So that idea of attentiveness. Yeah. Now, attentiveness is also connected with the use of the imagination. And I like to talk about how in order to really love our neighbors as ourselves, we have to use our imagination. Yeah. But you can be attentive and use your imagination in a way towards hate or a way towards love.
I see.
And so it's really important, like one of my favorite authors, Douglas Copeland, talked about that people trolling on the internet are very attentive.
Yeah,
but they're attentive in a way that's dehumanizing and hateful. But
Yeah.
so we need to really kind of try to cultivate a more loving, gracious imagination that can help us really think beyond just the surface of a person that's making us angry or that we disagree with,
Yes.
etc.
Yeah. And so your interest in kind of literature and story and narrative, what that's doing
Yes.
is making us pay attention to something we wouldn't normally pay attention to, in
Yes.
a sense. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's there's another great line from Simone Weil. She talks about how art and love love makes the invisible visible, and how art can really help with
see.
that as
Yeah.
well. The parts that we're going beyond what's just obvious on the surface,
Yeah.
and we're looking at another person that we might be tempted to sort of label and dismiss, put them in a category, and reading books or watching movies or listening to music from or about those with different cultures, life experiences, even different religions, can help us to really expand and grow our imagination rather than constrict it.
I see. I really like that. And hearing you talk more about kind of art being like revelatory and all of these things, I kind of want to ask, like, what is, I don't know how to say this, but what makes something good art versus bad art?
Oh,
and
gosh.
why are Christians so sometimes skeptical of
Yeah.
art and art that might not be overtly Christian? Like, I'd love to just hear more of your thoughts on some of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, plenty of Christians have either historically, I mean, there are many times when art has been very valued, but then we also have art that is seen as dangerous or scary, because I think that relates to the idea of art being prophetic, and artists are often subverting and asking hard questions and critiquing or lamenting rather than just leaving the status quo alone. They're shaking it up.
Yeah.
And so that can be seen as sort of dangerous.
Makes people uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Christians especially
Yeah,
sometimes.
but we need that.
Yeah.
And there's also a sense where the artist is pointing towards that which is invisible.
Yeah.
And it's not something that is easy to just get rid of or refute. I'm even thinking it's not just Christians, but when we look at Plato's Republic, Plato didn't want to have poets or musicians in the Republic because he thought what they were doing was like witchcraft, because it does something to us. There's a very spiritual component there that even he saw. But yeah, so we've seen so much, sadly, within different areas of the church where either there's a fear of the arts, that they're transgressive, or just that they're very secondary and kind of childish.
Yeah.
And as Francis Schaeffer said, that the arts was often treated just like window dressing.
Yeah.
That's not the important part of a church service.
Yeah.
That's not the important part of the Christian life.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Makoto Fujimura talks about how that when a church is being planted, he thinks that after you get the pastor, then you should look for the artists to come in.
Wow.
Because the artists are often the ones who are going to shake things up and challenge us to really think more deeply about the invisible reality.
Yeah. We really need to be shown that because we're so kind of blinded to it in a sense, or our ears aren't always open, our eyes aren't open.
Well, and Flannery O'Connor telling us that in her exaggerated satirical writings, that for those who are hard of hearing, you have to scream, and for those who are going blind, you have to draw large, startling figures.
Yeah.
But then an artist screaming and drawing large figures is often going to make people upset and scared.
Yes.
And so, but that's, if we're thinking of our own, not just those out there, but even within the church and ourselves, our own hard-heartedness and hard-headedness, we need to be shaken up.
Yeah.
So.
And I first of all, thank you for bringing up Francis Schaeffer, because I know we both have a love for Labrie in general. But yeah, also what you're saying about like the history of the church and their relationship to art, I feel like it reminds me of some of your relationship to popular culture, because a lot of times Christians, I feel today, are a bit skeptical of popular culture and things that aren't like too sanitized, or they might be afraid of the way it could deform us or be problematic. And so I'd love to hear, like, how does popular culture fit into all of this, what you're saying about shock and all of these things?
Yeah, it's interesting you said deform us. That's very interesting. But I mean, pop culture in general, because this is kind of, Well, I don't know. I don't like to make necessarily often distinctions between high and low culture because sometimes there's a kind of ivory tower mentality that, unless it's from the canon, can it really be saying things that are pointing to transcendence and truth and morality and goodness? Whereas there's so much incredible pop culture that, people think I'm joking when I say this, but I will say any day that I think Breaking Bad is on the level of Shakespeare.
Wow.
Because of the kind of ethical questions it raises, because it forces us to wrestle with some very different questions about what it means to be human, what is right and wrong.
Yeah.
And I just think there's a lot of good art that's being made like that.
Yeah.
Sadly, in the case of something like Breaking Bad, that was very popular, but sadly, there's a lot of great music and literature and films that don't tend to, they don't tend to be mainstream. They're not going to make as much money.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes people are looking for art that's going to make them feel good and comfortable and kind of scratch the itch.
Yeah.
Whereas not all of us want to be challenged.
No, or reveal the darkness actually that we
Yeah.
need to face and kind of grapple with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that connects. You did a lecture also this week at Regent about deconstruction and some pop culture as prophetic.
Yes.
In the way it can actually critique Christianity.
Yeah.
Does this connect to what you're saying now?
Yes. I was talking about the popularized use of the term deconstruction, which its academic use is quite a bit different from Jacques Derrida.
Yeah.
But the understanding in kind of more popular culture, deconstruction is just trying to look closely at the faith you've been brought up with or the faith that you acquired and kind of like questioning the nature of reality as you see it and asking, what is true, what is not true, what is cultural, what might be biblical, although the idea biblical, the term biblical might even be interrogated there. But I think that this is not a new thing. We see this all throughout the history of Christianity. When Christianity becomes more cultural than it has to do with, the Word of God or listening closely to the Holy Spirit. It's listening more to the spirit of the age.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good impulse to want to separate these things.
Yeah.
But it makes me concerned when the impulse then turns into a kind of cynicism where just pull everything out.
Yeah.
And you asked me about examples. I was talking more, in my lecture, I was talking quite a bit about literature.
Okay.
And this is popular culture too, the series and the novel, The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes. Yeah.
By Margaret Atwood.
Yeah.
And especially how that focuses on then when something that is really problematic and unethical becomes the norm, how it can happen slowly and that you don't even notice it's happening, and it's like you have to stand back and examine it.
Yeah.
And here in that series and novel, you have this, I don't know, you have this like Christian nationalist American nation.
It's eerie.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
But Margaret Atwood said that there's nothing in that novel that she wrote about that hasn't actually happened. And so it's kind of a cautionary tale. Now, I would say it has a prophetic edge because it is calling our attention in an apocalyptic sense. It's going to kind of take the veil back from some very problematic mechanisms.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really provide hope or an answer. And when we talk about the prophetic in Walter Brueggemann's sense, there needs to be hope. And he calls energizing hope based on doxology. And so then we can look at someone like, I don't know, a Christian author like Frederick Douglass, an formerly enslaved person, who makes it very clear in his writing that he critiques the use of Christianity, false Christianity, decontextualized as an oppressive tool. He makes a distinction between that Christianity, which he calls the Christianity of this land, meaning America, and the Christianity of Christ.
Yes.
And so I think it's so important. It's good to it's good to critique. It's good to be aware of the things that we need to pull out, but there also needs to be a movement towards hope and life and truth. So it's helpful when they're Christian authors
Yes.
that go there.
And can do the deconstruction and reconstruction
Yes.
together in a
Yes.
sense. And I would imagine that connects to the empathy and spiritual formation that we were talking
Absolutely.
about too.
Absolutely.
Kind of being pulled apart but then put back together in a
Yeah.
way. That's really good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I love that. And I also kind of just want to fangirl. I know, speaking of popular culture, I also love this intersection of popular culture and theology. And I know some of the things you love, I also love. So I would love to just ask you about an example, whether it's Sufjan Stevens or the new Netflix show Beef, just how these kind of pieces of art, artists, these works are kind of illuminating what we've been talking about,
Yeah.
and prophetic stuff, empathy stuff. Just, I'd love to hear your thoughts on one
Yes.
of those or something else.
Thanks for asking me to talk about things I love.
Yeah.
I just finished a week or two ago the series Beef, and I was blown away. I hate using cliche like that, but I mean, I was just in tears, just sobbing at the end. It was such a raw, honest, sad and beautiful depiction of the human condition.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's quite a profane show,
It is.
but it's an interesting mixture of sacred and profane, because I feel like in both contexts, these are human beings who are pushing to the end of themselves.
Yeah.
There's actually a worship song in there, in a worship service,
Yeah.
where the main character goes into this worship service and breaks down because he's tried so hard. He's just losing any kind of control over his life, and he's trying so hard to grab it, and an act of revenge has become an idol to him, and that's what's going to define him and give him worth. And then he goes into this service, and the song, when you come to the end of yourself, Jesus is waiting. And so I just recently talked about this show when we were reading parts of Pascal's Pensées.
Okay.
And Pascal talks about the dual nature of the human condition as wretched and glorious, and this kind of pendulum swing back and forth. And he talks about how the human condition is so paradoxical. You know, he says, on one hand, we're the glory of the universe and we're the refuse of the universe.
Wow. Yeah.
And he just talks about what a paradoxical mess we are inside. And there's a great line, and I think he took it from Augustine, because they both say, who will unravel this tangle? And in Beef, one of the episodes is named Caged. I Am a Cage. And it's basically showing that these two individuals, you learn about their childhood, you begin to have empathy for them. They do horrible things, and they also do good things. And sometimes they do bad things for good reasons. And it's so confusing, and it's so tangled up, and they come to the end of themselves, and it seems like there's nowhere else to go. And so it kind of puts out that question, who will unravel this tangle? I'm in a cage of my own making. So I could go on and on, because I really love that show.
No, I could listen to you all day. Thank you so much. That's so interesting. I love the tangle, and it's so good to talk to you and to just have you here. It's such a gift. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed talking with someone else who loves
all
these
the
topics,
things,
and Labrie and Regent.
No, it's so connected. I love it too.
So
It's win-win.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.